Good afternoon, everyone. Is that coming out as, I can't hear it from there.
I can hear you.
You can hear me from right there. Sounds like it's on, so we'll go with it. Well, welcome everybody. It's great to have you here today. My name's Winetta Ayers. I'm Executive Director for Commonwealth North. So please take a look at that, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have about membership with Commonwealth North. And finally, we want to acknowledge our program sponsors. Our programs could not be made possible without the support and underwriting of our corporate sponsors. And we're especially thankful today to Alaska Communications and ConocoPhillips Alaska for sponsoring our programs in 2024. So please join me in thanking our volunteers, members, and sponsors. Well, we have an information-packed program today, and housing challenges have long been a part of Alaska's history. Our boom and bust cycles, the relative lack of baseline development in Alaska, the ever-present challenges of a difficult and costly operating environment, all of those factors have confronted us throughout our history when it comes to developing and maintaining housing. But recent years have presented new headwinds in our housing market, and we've asked our panelists today to share their insights into the current state of the market in Alaska and the outlook for greater availability and affordability of housing in the future. So our panelists today, I'm going to briefly introduce Preston Simmons, representing the Housing Alaskans Public-Private Partnership, Daniel Delfino, Director of Planning and Program Development with the Alaska Housing Finance Corporation, Colleen Dushkin, former Executive Director of the Association of Alaska Housing Authorities, now Vice President of Culture and Strategy with Cook Inlet Housing. Congratulations, Colleen. Eric Visser, who's the founder of Visser Construction and the former board chair for the Alaska State Home Building Association, and Meg Zalatel, Executive Director of the Anchorage Coalition to End Homelessness. So our format today is that each of our panelists will speak for 5 to 7 minutes, and once each panelist has spoken, we'll ask them to join in a facilitated discussion from the seating here. And then we'll also ask you for your questions as an audience. And there are blue cards on your and pens on your table. So please jot down any questions that you may have for our panelists. And we'll leave time for Preston to present those questions to the panel. And so Preston will be our facilitator for that portion of the program. So, and he's leading off our housing lineup today. So it's my pleasure to turn the lecture over to Preston. He's the former Chief Executive Officer of Providence Health and Services Alaska. He's a President Emeritus of Commonwealth Board of Directors, and he's making great use of his retirement by not really resting for a second, I don't think. Maybe he's getting some hunting and fishing in. But with that, please help me welcome Preston Simmons. Preston?
Thank you. Well, good afternoon. Can you all hear me okay? So I'm going to give some background.
Yep.
I'm going to give some background slides to kind of set the tone a little bit. And maybe a lot of this information you already know. And then talk a little bit about Commonwealth North. See, the slides.
Then.
There we go. So it's multifaceted housing crisis in our state, and we just don't have enough houses in the state in many of our communities. It's cost way too much in terms of the housing. We're not getting development of housing just for a variety of reasons, and our aging housing stock is holding us back. Most of the stock in Alaska was built in the 70s and 80s. The slides I'm going to go through was a commission study from some slides from Agnew Beck we did in 2022. And we did a legislative lunch and learn a couple months ago. So I wanted to share some of those with you. So Agnew Beck said there's about 27,500 housing units needed in the state over the next 10 years. And that's equally divided basically between rehab facilities and new builds. In each of the communities, it's a little bit different around the state. So, for example, Matsu and Anchorage shows 7,000 units each. But in the Matsu area, it's really new builds. Where in Anchorage, it's the rehabilitation of existing units. Senator Murkowski came and talked to a housing forum this last summer. And previously, when she traveled around the state, one of the first things that came up when talking with a community member was energy costs, and now it's housing. And that's in any community you go to as I travel around the state also. So housing is both a social determinant of health. It's one of the basic items that you need. You need a roof over your head before you can really do anything else. But it's also an economic health for the state of Alaska. It's impeded our business growth and really an accessing workforce in all of our different industries, whether it's healthcare, fishing industry, energy, our other trades, construction trades, everything. It increases overcrowding. We have in many of our villages throughout the state and rural communities, there is way too much density in the housing that we have. Essential community services are curtailed. Shauna Hegna is our current board chair of Housing Alaskans, and she's told a story of their police department in Kodiak right now. They're unable to recruit police officers. They have a 50% vacancy rate. And one of the issues is there's no housing for the officers when they came in. As a Providence example, also on the same island, we recruited, in 2022, recruited 9 nurses, had them under contract. We had to cancel those contracts because they had no housing. And so you end up expending on travelers and other types of ways to get people into those communities. Significant losses in the employment sector. We've had an out-migration for several years within the state of Alaska now, especially among working families. Increases homelessness, and then more people in poverty further depresses each of our communities. This is from Alaska state data, and basically down the left column you have our different types of workers, everything from waiters and waitresses to registered nurses, and the wages needed to afford a 1-bedroom and 2-bedroom home within the state of Alaska. You can see a lot of our workers fall below those lines. And another way of looking at this is housing needs by income. There's a lot of help for below 80% of AMI in terms of federal dollars and grants. And in the upper end, it tends to take care of itself. But the middle income housing, which is most of our workers in Alaska, it takes, you're not eligible for federal state subsidy, but it requires some type of public assistance to be able to build units that are affordable in terms of the gap. If you look here, another way of looking at it, 80% of AMI might be an example of a double income household if a personal care assistant and a meal clerk. And up at the 2,400 end or 120% of AMI, it might be a medical assistant, a construction worker, or a marketing manager. But what doesn't pencil is cost of development in Alaska. So in 2022, to build a multi-unit apartment building, it requires a rental rate of about $2,300 to $2,400 a month to pencil. That bumps up against that 120% of AMI that you saw in the previous slide. So also our rents that most people can afford in different communities throughout the state don't support that new development as well. So we have some structural issues, and we have to figure out ways to be able to subsidize some of the builds or create incentive structures for our contractors, and also for providing incentives to individuals to be able to get in to their homes. So a little bit of Housing Alaskans. It was formed in 2022 by $1 million grant from the legislature and a small gift from the Rasmussen Foundation. And so our first year was really spent in 23 of getting a board together. We have a 14-member board of leaders throughout Alaska, which half is rural and Alaska Native leadership. And then we have an absolute wonderful technical advisory committee of about the same size. Two of our members, Colleen and Eric, are here today, and they do a lot of really heavy lifting in terms of our grant cycles and so forth. In 23, we wanted, because of the acute need throughout the state, we decided to give out as much money as we could. So we gave out $750,000. We did proof of concept. We did a 3-week grant cycle. We had 38 applications. And the criteria is you had to break ground in 23 or finish construction. 34 of those applications met that criteria. We gave out 3 $100,000 and 3 $150,000 grants. Out of that, we created 84 homes at 6 communities across the state. So that was an amazing return on investment. Most of those were very complex funding capital stacks within those projects. For example, one of the known projects had up to 18 different funding sources. Most of them had Alaska Housing Finance Corporation as well. So what happened is, because the price escalations have been going up so much, they just couldn't close the gaps and break ground, or some of those projects were going to lose federal funding. So for us to be able to have the flexibility as the Housing Trust coming in, we were able to add top-off funding to get those projects underway, and some really great stories. So these are the 6 projects we were able to do: Nome Community Center, Ontario Regional Housing Authority, RELCAP, Wasilla Area Seniors, Sitka Homeless Coalition, and Aware, and those were spread throughout the state. Our technical advisory group reviewed all those applications and made those recommendations. Originally, we were just going to give out 3, but they really stressed the need, and we had so many really good applications. We recently also just did a kind of a canvassing of the state, and there's many more projects out there. We went to the legislature this year, and we have $6 million that were approved in the budget. And that's to take us to the kind of the next level as our housing trust. And that's in the governor's hands right now. So hopefully the full $6 million is approved. We proved that we can be very flexible, get that funding out very quickly, and make a difference. One of the things is we do not duplicate any efforts in the state. On our board, we have the CEO of the Brennan Butcher from the Alaska Housing Finance Corporation, Chad Stoville from HUD, and others. So we make sure we work hand in glove and don't duplicate efforts. So it's really, how do we connect dots across the state as a housing trust and work with everybody? So our grant impacts: people were housed, developer challenges were reduced. We have many insights in terms of what needs to be done from a policy perspective, as well as other logistic issues and so forth across the state. And then that leverage funding ensures public funded projects get built. We have a philanthropy group also. Our goal is to raise $3 million over the next 2 years to add into those public funds to further our mission to work with others throughout the state. So that was just a quick overview, and I'd like to ask Dan to come up.
Thank you, Des. Bye. Thank you. Well, thank you all for the invitation to come out and chat. And as a tall person, I do appreciate having a microphone so I don't look like a DJ doing this throughout the whole talk. So what I'm here to chat about is we have something new. So you were the first to actually see this. The slides I'm going to go through, this first one here, this is usually part of an hour-long presentation that we do internally at Alaska Housing, so you're getting the abridged version, but this is the most recent information that we have about some of the markets right now. So just generally what I want to chat about is the housing market in general and how we track it. we have a lot of mission-based programs that do what doesn't happen in the market by itself. But we always want to make sure that we're looking at the rest of the market to make sure that our social benefit programs don't overlap with what the private sector is already doing. And that's part of why we have this information here. So what you can see is an overlay from 2018 to the current year. And what this data represents is what the relationship between home ownership and the renter market. And when we say rental market, we're talking about the unrestricted renter market. The units that we funded at Alaska Housing that are income restricted are excluded from this. So we're just looking at the white or whoever it is that has a rental unit. It could be a condo down the street. Anything that's charged without income restrictions would show up. We did this survey, and we've been doing the survey every year since the mid-90s. So we have a fairly consistent methodology. It's done in March of each year, and we overlay the information with the rental or the lender market as well. So when we do a survey of lenders and we compare our portfolio of loans at Alaska Housing to what we're seeing in the lending market, you have March to March for the rental market and the home ownership market. So what this shows is both lines are going up. So it's more expensive to be a renter than it used to be in 2018, but it's also considerably more expensive to be a homeowner than it was in 2018. Now, 2018, the interest rates back then were 4.5%. Now we're looking at 2024, the interest rate we plugged in here was 6.5%. A lot of that is related to the interest rate. I know it's small print, and I'm assuming that this will be online for you. If you have any questions about it, we're happy to go into more detail. But the average home price was in the low threes back in 2018. Now it's over $400,000. If you took a home in 2018 at 4.5%, that used to cost $316,000, slap a 6.5% interest rate on it, your mortgage, your principal and interest payment goes up to about $1,700. If you take the $419,000 home this year and put a 4.5% interest rate on it, it goes down to about $1,700 a month. So I say this not to get too mathy, but there's a relationship between the prices of the homes that I'm sure knows much better than I do. There's a relationship between the price of the home escalating to the interest rate going up. And we see that as really having a pronounced effect on the data set in general. The cost of home ownership has gone up by over 50% over this period, whereas the cost of to rent has gone up by about over a quarter. This is a statewide average. When we get into individual communities, some of the communities, it's over 70% the increase since 2018. So it's pronounced. So when we talk about affordability, a lot of times we talk about the rental market, but there is a linkage between when a person goes from the rental market into a homeowner unit. And if we have all of a sudden, there are a bunch of people that were renters that aren't becoming homeowners, they're stuck in a market and they're, I don't want to say clogging, but they're occupying units that would normally be freed up as people make their transition to homeowners. So we're seeing a lot of things, a lot of lines are moving at the same time with different angles in the housing market, and it's a really complicated process to try and unpack. What you see here is the result of just the renter market. When we talked about the unrestricted units, what you see here are median values. So with the lender data, we take averages because that's all we have. We don't have the individual values for each of the homes, but here we literally take the rents, lowest rent, and we stack them on until we get the highest rent and find the middle. So that's what we're talking about with the median. You can see the median rents pretty much across the state have gone up over the last year alone. The gentleman mentioned Kodiak, Preston, 20% increase year over year in Kodiak. It's substantial. I don't know if how many people got an 8% raise in Kodiak, a 20% raise in Kodiak, or 7.8% raise in Anchorage. I mean, you're comparing it to inflation. So the housing costs are definitely going up for renters. Vacancy rates, I don't want to say stable. We haven't seen a lot of big changes in vacancies. We've seen them over the years. But most recently, the line that's been moving faster is the changes in the actual rent. So what's this been looking like over time? This takes pretty much the last 10 years. And we look at housing and its relationship with the population. I mean, really, more people are going to need more places to live. So it's a pretty consistent relationship that we've seen over the years. You can see the state population that the Department of Labor publishes every year. You can see that going up and down. over here, and this orange line is the vacancy rate that we track in that rental market survey. Why I'm putting this up is back in 2019, we were worried that we were overbuilding in certain communities because we were starting to see that affordable rents had lowered to the area where some of the market rents were. That is not the case anymore. So this has changed. We do have more people, but we're not even back to 2016 yet in terms of our population, and the market is tight. So it feels like the market is changing quite a bit. The market is tightening, but it's not because we've had gangbusters population growth going back. We're not like North Dakota in the boom years when they discovered oil a few years back. The line's going up a little bit, but it's still a really tight market. I say 6%. We have some communities, Matsu, Juneau, I mean, they're consistently really, really low in terms of the vacancy rates. So that 6%, that is an average. We have some areas that are struggling, but other areas are really, really tight, and it's just basically trying to work. So what's to explain it? And I'm just throwing up the options here. And that when I started in my role, it was back in 2008, the top pretty much defined the relationship, or at least conceptually how we addressed it. You had homeowner units, rental units, and places where people on vacation went to go. So now this can be any number of things. It can be a sale unit, it can be a rental unit, it can be a VRBO. It can change identities throughout the year. We didn't have that back in 2008 at the level that we did. The reason why I'm bringing that up is that when we're tracking the relationship between population and housing, that affects the homeowner and the rental units. When we have a sort of multi-purpose inventory coming in, what you don't see is hospitality or the people coming into the state that are staying and occupying units, maybe on a short-term basis, maybe on assignment or something like that. That's, I would say, a gap in the data that may shed some light on how this is going. But when I say that, I put a bunch of caveats on that because it's highly localized when we talk to the community members about the impact that short-term rentals or even seasonality can have. So we can't really make a broad generalization about the actual state. So I'm going to make a broad generalization about the state. If you look at the statewide numbers for the rentals, or the short-term vacation rentals, Andy Trining here in a purple shirt, he's the one who manages a lot of our data and works with this contract with AirDNA, but this basically scrapes the information that's available when people list rental units on a short-term basis. And you can see the number of listings available and their occupied relationship. The Department of Labor, they have the same contract with these people, but what you can see is trough to trough, it keeps going up every year. We haven't reached one of these points where it levels off. Our data stops right here where we're about to get into the peak months in June and July, but we have an inventory that appears to be growing still. It has a leveled out. What relationship does that have to the overall market? It's complicated. This data breaks down very quickly when we start getting into small communities. So it's big enough that we can tell that this is relevant to the discussion, but when we drill down to the micro level in some of the communities, it's very hard to make very, very definitive statements because the quality of the data breaks down. And it's a challenge that we have in a lot of our Alaskan communities. You look at a data set and then you have a population of like 300 and a percentage change just gets absolutely crazy. So that's why I think the vacation rental one is a very, very difficult nut to crack. But I don't want to end on a downer note. I think we may touch on this on some of the questions, but one of the things that has changed, in addition to the sort of inventory, this was the technology that we actually used when I started in 2008. What you see here is a map of service providers that are working with each other, crossing boundaries. So we have a lot of housing challenges, but the technological advances that we have in our industry has enabled people in the Kenai Peninsula to house people in Bethel with case managers, and their rent is paid by a processing group out of the valley. So we are seeing, despite some of these challenges, there is an evolution in the way that our partners are doing business, and it's allowing people to expand services to communities that were previously boxed out. So I know the market is tight and things are getting really affordable and really, really pricey, but I did want to end on a somewhat positive note and say there are encouraging signs in that we're working together pretty well and effectively across the state. And it's a great segue because Colleen represents one of our bigger partners that has a lot of these maps. So with this, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Colleen Dushkin from Cook Inlet Housing Authority.
Thank you. That was kind of odd to hear my name assimilated with Cook Inlet Housing Authority. Yeah, get used to it. I will. So good afternoon, everybody. My name is Colleen Dushkin. I serve as the VP of Culture and Strategy for Cook Inlet Housing Authority. Formerly, I was the Executive Director for the Association of Alaska Housing Authorities. Some of the detailed information that like we've heard from Daniel, and you'll probably hear from Meg, and you've heard from Preston, I'm going to cover during the Q&As, but I wanted to give a broader overview of the association and the members of the organization. So AHA, as we know it, is a membership organization. Our members are the 14 regional housing authorities in the state, and the Alaska Housing Finance Corporation is also a member of the organization. But we do our work also with partners and affiliate members from across in Alaska. So the RHAs are based loosely around the Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act lines, with the exception of Ketchikan and Baranof Island. When they were created by state statute in 1971, there were 14 of them listed. So they vary in size. We have ABCP Regional Housing Authority that serves 52 tribes, I believe, and then some smaller ones like Baranof Island that serves one tribe. And so collectively, they serve 196 tribes across the state. Important to note that there's also an additional 41 tribes that have their own housing programs in the state. So, let's see. So what do housing authorities do? And this is going to play a part into AHA as a whole and kind of our mission and what we do together. So RHAs are, like I said, tribally designated housing entities. So they're providing these services to 196 tribes. And their services and who they serve vary greatly. But these are the individuals that are on the ground providing affordable housing in our community. Sometimes they're the only developers of affordable housing in our communities. And when we start answering questions during our Q&A session, we'll hear a little bit about some of the challenges that they have and the success that they have. But as you can imagine, the North Slope up here at Kagamila and Unamila Housing Authority, when we talk about challenges, we talk about transportation. For example, the ship leaves Seattle, gets to Uktiavik in August. But we also have very similar challenges for transportation, even in Cook Inlet Housing Authority. And our supply chain distribution issues. And so, although very, very different, we still have similar challenges. And so, AHA, what we do collectively as an organization, we cover advocacy issues. So because our members are boots on the ground and they are developing, they're going to be the best ones to tell you why policies are or are not working. They're the ones that can pinpoint how the policies are affecting our families on the ground. And they're the ones that will be able to provide you the best suggestions for how policy works for our families. Providing education about our programs and the programs that our housing authorities utilize and how they're impacting our families on the ground. And then we also do training and technical assistance for the programs that help our families that are provided by the housing authorities that are on the ground. So AHA in general is an amazing organization built with partners so we can provide a voice for our families, for our communities, and really uplift how housing development works in our communities. And that was a brief update of kind of who we are broadly, generally, some of the things that we do. Griffin Hagel-Forrester couldn't be with us today. He was wanted to, but wasn't able to. He is the new executive director for the Association of Alaska Housing Authorities.
super, super excited for him. He used to run TNHA up in the North Slope. He's a brilliant person. So we're excited that he has taken the reins at the association. So you're welcome to contact him, but you can also contact me at Cook Inlet Housing Authority. So, and with that, I'll turn it over to Eric.
I think that was just great.
Purpose.
Thank you. Colleen, as Colleen said, I'm Eric Visser. I'm the owner of Visser Construction. I'm a member and past president of the Anchorage Home Builders Association, as well as the State Association. We're a national federation. We have over 150,000 members nationwide. And so on the national level, I also sit on the Construction Codes and Standards Committee. I'm on the Building Technology and Research Subcommittee. We have a budget of about $500,000 annually that we study code changes, energy design, new code proposals. So that's kind of a fun committee that I get to sit on. Here in Alaska, I have the pleasure of serving on the Cold Climate Housing Research Center Board, as well as ACAT, that's the Alaska Center for Appropriate Technology, as well as the Advisory Committee for Housing Alaskans, a public-private partnership. So I'm going to talk a little bit about housing affordability first, and then talk about some federal issues that we're dealing with, along with state and local issues. So as we've heard previously, we all know housing affordability is at its almost worst point ever in history. And just to give you some background, to get back to pre-pandemic levels, one of these three things need to happen to get back to pre-pandemic housing affordability levels. Property prices need to decline by 35%. Interest rates need to go down 4%. So we got to go from 7 back down to 3. Or U.S. incomes need to rise by 55%. So we're at a huge gap, right? I don't think anybody in this room ever sees anything like that happening. So it's really going to be a combination of one of those three things happening, along with potential changes to zoning code, local building codes, that sort of thing. And I would just say I think that I hope that we have such a bad housing affordability crisis right now that this spurs us to action, to actually get something done, because that's really what we need right now is action. So on the federal level, federal government's kind of going in the opposite direction in terms of housing affordability. I was just in Washington, D.C. last week, meeting with our senators and representatives. One of the big things that's coming right now is the adoption of the 2021 IECC, which is our energy code. Anchorage is currently on the 2018 IECC. To go to the 2021, we estimate that the costs are going to go up about $30,000 per house. And the reason that this is scary is because recently HUD and USDA mandated that all of their loan programs, for anybody to get a loan, they have to build to that energy standard. So that also in turn mandates BA, because they have a mandate that they follow whatever USDA and HUD does. So any VA loan has to get built to that standard starting later on next year. So what does that mean for a military personnel in Anchorage, in Fairbanks, that wants to build a new home next year? They're going to come and say, hey, I qualified for this VA loan. We're pre-approved. I want to build this house. And whereas builders are going to say, okay, we can build this house for $600,000, but we actually have to meet this code. So maybe it's going to cost $650,000, and so they're going to say, well, we want this zero down loan, so we want to go with the BA loan program. We build that house, final appraisal comes in. Well, it turns out that house is actually still worth $600,000. So then they're going to have to come up with that extra $50,000 or whatever it ends up being. We don't have numbers specifically for Alaska yet, but they're going to have to come and basically make up that gap in what the value of the home is versus what it costs to build versus what the appraisal actually comes back at. So as you can see that, chances are they're probably going to end up going with more traditional types of financing, just to get a more economical home built and not have to come up with so much money out of pocket. The other scary thing that's coming at the federal level is that FHFA also signaled that they're considering doing the exact same thing. So all of our first-time home buyer programs, that sort of thing, might have to get built to that code. And I can tell you, if that does actually happen, AHFC's loan programs are going to become very popular very quickly. On the state level, I was thinking that Dana was going to cover a lot of the AHFC stuff. But one thing I was just going to say that I thought was pretty cool that we passed this legislative session is SB 87. It's basically set up a lumber grading training program for sawmill operators in Alaska, so we can use locally sourced lumber. It's actually graded, so it passes code, and people can use it to build homes that they get financing under. At the local level, I would say I'm optimistic because we've never had more conversations around housing. We're going to see from people in this room, there's a lot of different groups that are talking about housing. Hopefully we can, with this new administration, actually, like I said, drive some action in trying to improve some of the things in Anchorage. There's a lot of little, like Title 21 and Title 23 issues that we could fix with the stroke of a pen that would drop costs of housing by thousands of dollars in the city. And I hope we have the political will to make that happen. Other things that are happening in Anchorage, there's some YIMBY groups that are meeting for the first time ever. People that are not homeowners, they're renters. They want to become homeowners. They're basically getting a group of people together to lobby for some of these code changes that we need in the city. The MOA recently passed a bunch of reduced parking requirements. We have zoning code changes proposals that are coming up. We also relaxed some of the requirements for construction of triplexes and fourplexes in the city. So that, paired with FHA's requirement to lower down payment to 5% for multifamily, will hopefully drive a lot of triplex and fourplex construction that we haven't built many of those in Anchorage in decades. So hopefully we see more of those coming online over the next couple of years. And with that, I'll leave that and look forward to the rest of the conversation and bring up Meg.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Meg Zalatel. I'm with the Anchorage Coalition End Homelessness. So I'm not going to talk so much about the housing market per se, but I am going to talk a little bit about the intersection of housing and how it is a solution to homelessness. There's no way to avoid the fact that there is homelessness in our community. You see it on our streets. So let's talk real numbers. I just want to lay a little groundwork for you before we dive into these slides. All right. So as of today in Anchorage, there are 3,113 people experiencing literal homelessness. That means they're in a shelter, they're on the streets, or they're in transitional housing. HUD considers them all to be literally homeless, all right? 17% of those folks, about 550, are unsheltered and on our streets. The remaining 83% have somewhere to be. And the reason I stress that is compared to other West Coast cities, we're doing well in that regard because other West Coast cities are seeing those numbers inverse, right? Where they're saying the majority of their folks outside and not inside. So I want to start by that rate by really laying the groundwork about what we're talking about when we talk about homelessness. I also want to give you another little figure, which is 11,000 people touch the homelessness prevention and response system annually. 11,000 people are served, and right now 3,100 people remain, right? So most people bounce, right? That's how I like to think of it. They touch the system, they get what they need, and they move along. So I think that's really important also to remember is that we are serving many more people than that 3,113 number. All right, so with that was a little bit of groundwork. I want to talk about two recent improvements in our homelessness response system. One is Anchored Home. It's our community strategic plan to address homelessness and the next step. So Anchored Home probably to a lot of you is a familiar term. Our community's first strategic plan was adopted back in the late teens. And it was really the first time that we had a community plan to address homelessness. Then COVID hit and we rethought how we address homelessness. And so from those learnings, Anchored Home 2023 to 2028, or as a lot of people like to call it, Anchored Home 2.0, has come around. So let's talk a little bit about that first. So I'm really happy we talked about the housing market, because what we have learned as we have worked to solve homelessness through housing is that low-income housing isn't necessarily our solution. It is our folks, people experiencing homelessness, are not necessarily able to access a lot of low-income housing programs, or they are not competitive, or they can't wait. A lot of these programs have long wait lists. So one of our goals is to create 150 housing units a year for people experiencing homelessness. So the idea here is really to say, hey, if housing solves homelessness, how are we targeting housing to people experiencing homelessness? One of the ways we have done that recently is we have small set-asides in the hotel conversions. You may remember the hotel conversions. 3 hotels were converted to housing. It's quite economical. It averaged out to about $79,000 a door. And using HUD payback or HUD payment standards for rent, they have about a 6.5-year payback, right? So those are great, but they were not necessarily designed for people experiencing homelessness. But we do have small set-asides where we can continually put people in those units. Partly, we need to work with our partners at AHFC to ensure that we have project and sponsor-based vouchers to cover rents. We need to establish more relationships with non-homelessness service providers, right? We want to weave a tighter safety net, a cross-sector safety net. The tighter that safety net is, the more, the more tension it has, the faster we can bounce people, right? If we can catch people coming out of corrections and bounce them into housing, if we can catch people coming out of healthcare and bounce them into housing, then they are not entering the shelter system, or they're not entering the streets. So we need to do more cross-sector partnerships. And then we are working to increase our street outreach efforts to house at least 150 people a year. This is only the second summer Anchorage has had coordinated adult-focused street outreach. Only the second summer. So we spent the first year and a half really laying the groundwork, connecting with people, forming relationships, getting them into our data system so we know who is there and where they're at. And I am pleased to announce that we just noticed our first encampment of about 13 people who over the next 21 days will work to move from their encampment straight into housing. So 21 days from now, you ask me where that encampment is, and I'm going to say it's gone. And you're going to ask me where those people went, and I'm going to say they went to housing. All right? Which is exciting. We have never put efforts on the street to move people directly to housing. I'm going to tell you how we do that. So how we do that is called the next step. So this past December, we launched this initiative called the next step, where we said we're going to house 150 people in 6 months. And how did we do that? We've been talking in this community for a long time about the Houston model. Well, I happened to run into those folks from Houston last October at a conference, and I said, do you want to come to Alaska? They said, sure. When? I said, how's December? And they said, wait a minute. And I said, well, we're ready. Our community is ready to try your Houston model. But the best way for us to do that is to leverage our resources against standing up additional emergency cold weather shelter in the winter. We could create flow using that municipal investment, right, as a catalyst to move people to housing. And that's what we did. So the next step does really 2 key things. It works with a variety of community landlords. We don't have any one landlord we work with. We actually have 15 landlords with 3 property management companies involved. And then over the top, we have case management organizations. And we bought our way into both markets. And we sit in the middle where we just literally the funds come to us, but we pay and we guarantee the rents. And then we oversee that all the pieces are moving. So what we learned in doing this is when you house 150 people in 6 months, that's housing someone every 1.2 days. We have 96% housing retention right now, and we are seeing the drop in people experiencing homelessness, right? And this is more than 150 people. So, right, this isn't the only effort happening, but we are seeing the results. Now, the real results will come at 24 months. We expect a housing retention rate of 85%. Because we give 12 months of support, but what we're trying to do in that 12 months of support is to set that platform. Really, housing first is right, you get into housing, so you have that platform by which to address your needs. Employment needs, behavioral health needs, substance misuse. And so our real metric will be at 24 months. How are people doing when those supports are no longer with them at 24 months? Our supports are 200 hours a year. Interestingly, 200 hours of case management supports cost just over $7,000. So imagine that for policymakers in the room. An ambulance call, a police call, all of those have dollar figures. You'll get to that $7,000 figure pretty darn quickly. We budget for this program approximately $31,000 a person. That presumes a little over $1,300 a month in rent, which is a one-bedroom rate using HUD's payment standard. But what we're finding is as we house folks, if we house a couple, right, our costs are reduced. So with our initial budget for the 150 people, we've actually been able to commit to stretch that money to 45 people this summer as we actively raise money to support more people. We would love to house another 150 people this summer. So housing is more affordable than shelter. Based on our conservative budget numbers, it's about $85 a day compared to $100 for shelter. We had great partnerships, the municipality of Anchorage, philanthropy, client contributions in the first 150 people we housed. Over $300,000 of the costs will be borne by the people housed. Their own assets they are bringing forward. No one pays more than 30% of their income toward rent, but if they come with a voucher, if they come with any other resources, we count that, right? It is a partnership with us, right? I think Preston mentioned one community had 18 funding sources in its fund stack. Well, we do individual client fund stacks. What can you bring to the table? What can we bring to the table? And how can we make that work and stretch so that you have as long of a glide path as possible till you're 100% on your own? We don't want anyone to have a cliff. All right, so we sit in the middle, as I mentioned. We have the landlords and the case management, and we all work together. The money that in this project goes back out to the community, either into the private sector through landlords or into nonprofit case management organizations. And as I mentioned, we're just getting ready with our first outdoor encampment, which is very exciting. And there are ways you can help, right? We are not having any issues finding units. We actually have had some folks pull their short-term rental units off the market and offering them to us. And we give everyone a moving kit. Nobody moves into a bare apartment. So there's lots of opportunities to get involved. And would love to connect with you. Thanks.
Okay. I'd like to go ahead and invite our co-panelists to the chairs. Before each and each of your tables have some blue note cards. If you have a question you would like to Seth will collect those about 5 minutes after.
Or you want to use I mean, like type before that.
Sean told me they cold to look at again, but I so it was really they don't listen to check this and can vote on right
Trade if you want.
for like you.
Come to that by. She like more tall, she's like walking with her. Come to instead.
Developments that Cook Inlet Housing Authority has done in the last 15 years would have been able to be developed under this code. So how much windows needs to be based in a street? We have families that their beds are underneath windows because of those codes. The garage's size, would my home qualify for that? Probably not. So it would just kind of piggybacking on the stroke of a pen, those things can be changed. And so we look forward to those kind of things changing for us to continue to provide affordable housing in Anchorage.
Perfect. Tim. I'll just make one quick point because I don't usually get on the policy thingies, but One thing is actually people. There are just straight up not enough people to hire to do a lot of the work with a lot of our organizations around the state. So, I mean, with a bunch of money, if it's only so many people, people I talk about this thing. You can't build things without people to actually build it. There are some things that we can address with technology, but other things just require more people than we all have a lot of companies right now.
Eric, could you maybe talk about what could be given to or incentive to developers maybe to be able to build more affordably? What could public agencies, in terms of land or infrastructure or some of those major code changes perhaps?
I think a lot of like buy to rate development. I would say that's one thing that developers and builders struggle with, especially here in Anchorage, is that you buy a piece of property thinking you can do something with it. And then all of a sudden we get these code changes that all of a sudden prevent you from building what you were thinking you were going to be able to build. I've had the unfortunate experience of meeting with people who bought a nice lot on, say, in like Bear Valley, and they've owned it for a few years, and they come to me and they say, hey, we want to build our dream home on this piece of property. And then they realize that, oh, well, you're going to have to spend about $250,000 to upgrade municipal right away to get to your lot. Just some little stuff like that, I think, prevents a lot of people from getting out there and just being able to build stuff.
Kenny, any other comments? Meg, there was an article in the ADN this morning about the duplex or some of the things the city is looking at. Could you go into that a little bit?
Sure, let me change hats. And so let me put Meg Zalatel, assembly member hat on. So that's the newest iteration of the home initiative. It'll be for public hearing and vote on Tuesday the 25th. We have scaled that back in consultation with the community to do really two things. One is it would give by rights ability in all zoning districts to have 2 housing units, a duplex, basically. And the second thing, it plus an ADU. ADU is additional, it's accessory, so 2 primary housing units. The other thing it does is says that those 2 housing units don't have to be attached, that you may have 2 primary structures, 2 principal structures for housing. So really 2 things, 2 simple things that open up this opportunity to have for every lot in Anchorage up to 3 housing units, 2 primary, 1 accessory. So we're hopeful that it passes. It is really scaled back. What we have learned as the sponsors of that is you have to possibly take smaller bites. We can't quite be as bold as we may want to be. And as we heard throughout, kind of to what Colleen and Erica said, is one of the biggest barriers to developing housing is the residential design standards. And so that's kind of like the next project. We took one on and we heard like, okay, yeah, you all did that, but we would really like you to do this other thing too. So I think that will be next.
And I guess since you have your assembly hat on, having the ability to see those changes when they're made by municipalities, and this isn't only for, I guess, the MOA, but like statewide, if there's going to be citywide changes, whether it be Nome, whether it be Anchorage, whether it be wherever, that there is the red line to see how it would impact and see how those developers will be impacted on Brett.
So Dan, you had mentioned workforce in terms of housing development, just like all the industries, people are begging to get workers up here. Are there any innovations you can think of how to train more workers in the construction industry that you're seeing around the state?
Sure. So we have a couple of things on the workforce front. One, we have a last frontier housing initiative where we're actually working directly with communities around the state to try and make sure that they have housing for their essential workers. So we're like Kotzebue, Bethel. We're actually working with them and saying, if we're coming to you with you need to make sure that make sure that your residents are cleared. So we're directly engaging with certain communities where it's literally critical and creates issues for them. With regards to the workforce training, a lot of our programs, we have apprenticeship requirements or incentives. The trade, we have a lot of hires with books coming out of the Department of Corrections, skills. So we try and connect our housing programs to job training as much as possible. There's a lot of things like additional workspace with our public housing division here as well. Kathy could talk to our public housing director. It's not necessarily for our workforce training division, but we have opportunities to partner. We generally do, but the workforce issue is so big that we're directly going to communities to address it. And some of them are finding out that's partly why we have to do it is they don't have local development departments to actually do it themselves. So we could give them $5 million to develop housing, but no one knows how to do an RFP for housing construction or addressing any of the issues that Eric would have. He's trying to respond to it. So we're trying to supplement their staffing with our own expertise to help them get them over the finish line.
Thanks. Any other comments? Beck. Has this question from the audience, has there been any research on how much the Jones Act and BAA and TAA Acts impact housing construction cost for Alaska housing projects?
When it's a BA,
I think that
I could tell you about Baba.
the Jones Act, isn't that related to transportation costs up here? So
not fan.
I haven't done any research on it, but I know, increased costs, for sure.
anything, Dan, or
The Baba could be and Colleen Dushkin.
I don't think it said Baba.
I thought
no, she got AATA, so you wrote the question kind of, yes.
Oh, it's the BA. Oh, yeah, the BAP. Baba. Yes. I could talk about Baba.
Okay.
We could talk about Baba all day. Actually, I got a Baba expert back there talking about Baba.
This whole.
The tribal housing has been extended, an exception extended until September, but we anticipate that when BABA is implemented, it will have huge impacts on our communities. Our lumber comes from Canada. Our Toyo stoves come from Japan. We don't know what that impact's going to be, but we know it's going to be substantial. And being on the end of the supply chain is another disadvantage, because once BABA is implemented across the country, our manufacturing muscle is not fully developed to support all of the development in the country. We 100% agree that we need to flex that muscle, and we need to become a country that promotes our industry, but we're going to feel huge impacts. And I think being on the end of the supply chain is just another kind of kick to the gut. So we anticipate it's going to be bad. We don't know how much, and we don't know if we're going to be able to get a more permanent waiver or for specific things or generally. So we're just kind of bracing to see what HUD, as the main funder for Indian housing, comes up with to help us.
Thanks. There's also, just in terms of this next question, how can publicly and federal, state, local be committed for the use of residential development to reduce cost?
Yeah. No, typical. Well, so all kinds of ways, right? So if you could take the land costs out of the deal, right, you're basically reducing your per unit costs. And if you can even work more, right, public-private partnerships. So love it or hate it, the Full Hills development down in Girdwood was a public-private partnership. The land is the public portion from the municipality through the Heritage Land Bank. Has also a CDS request for some of the on-site improvements through Alaska Water and Wastewater Utility. So those defrayments should bring down the cost of development. Those are still market rate, but otherwise it wouldn't go at all, right? So some of it's just to make it go, even for market rate development. And then you can go further with the opportunities where it could actually be subsidized. I believe that's the Block 96 development downtown. That's on a municipal land lease.
plus money in to the project from the municipality. So public-private partnerships are really fantastic. There's a lot of flexibility in there, as Eric mentioned about off-site improvements, roads, sewer, water, right-of-way, right? How can we partner with government to defray those costs? Because those costs can kill a project or substantially increase it to a way where then even in a fund-stacked project that is subsidized has to go and find something else, right? So it's a way to hopefully be able to help cut some of that regulatory red tape, or at least defray the cost if you're going to require it.
Okay. So Eric can correct me on the numbers, but I think about 70% of total development cost is your building materials and your labor and those type of things. And then you have your land and those other components. And so that's a big way if we could get government or tribal systems and others to be able to donate land and then also to pay for some of those infrastructure costs. I think another Kodiak example, because just Delfino housing out there in former life, but there's land maybe available, but there is no infrastructure connections, and they're limited in the amount of public water systems and all that. So it gets pretty complicated depending on the municipality you're in, but there's a lot of opportunity there. On logistics costs of bringing supplies up, there's opportunities too for better coordination across the state of Alaska in terms of a lot of projects are done in this summertime. So if different communities would pool their resources or coordinate together, and then you could reduce your shipping costs to get up. And you could also think about different vessels going up in terms of maybe fishing or so forth that might be coming lower that could bring supplies up at lower cost. So it's kind of a lot of things we're going to have to think outside the box, and then ideas that I've heard in talking to people around the state. There's a lot of great ideas out there that'll drop costs. I think your cold climate in terms of the 3D printing of homes, if that project, that could reduce costs significantly if they can figure out how to get the equipment up there and keep it maintained and so forth. So
I would just jump in and say, I like to say I'm kind of like where the rubber meets the road, right? I'm in at the house on a daily basis. Somebody's building it. I'm there when the inspector shows up. There's a lot of just simple things that we can do to drive down the cost of housing. A prime example here in Anchorage is our glulam beam policy. Super simple thing. The code states that if the glulam beam is not covered by a roof or similar structure, it has to be treated. Okay, and going from a regular glulam beam to a trans glulam beam drives up costs because one, we can't treat them here in the state of Alaska. We have to order it from Lower 48. SBS and Builder's Choice, they don't stock a lot of treated glulam beams because they're so expensive. It's just a policy of the municipality that says if it's not covered under a roof, then it has to be treated. I know there's one specific house that got built that it changed the cost of these glulam beams by $30,000 on one house just because it's being went from inside the house, outside the house. So instead of the muni allowing us to put some flashing over the top of it and ice and water shield to protect it from the elements, they said, no, you can't do that. You got to get treated glulam beams. And it's what are we trying to do, guys? Is this, it will last just the same amount of time if we flash in, put ice and water shield over it. But that's the determination of the municipality. So our hands are tied as builders. We just have to follow those kind of regulations. So I would just, suggest everybody contact your local officials, turn down whatever they can do to do simple code changes to drive down the cost of housing. We can do it. We can make it happen.
yeah, a lot of this is common sense for sure.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of common sense, when we think about bulk shipping and a fishing vessel, for example, those in theory may work, but those also have not been tested. I don't know one housing authority that might give up their stuff to put on a fishing vessel into it. I don't believe it. It just sounds like a big liability to me, but like proof of concept would be great for those type of thought processes. But even when we talk to our members about, yes, it is very, very expensive. If we even rented a barge, would it actually make a difference? Or if we bought in bulk? And you think about, well, I'm not quite sure. So in theory, those things are great. In concept, they need to be proven.
Well, yeah, for sure. Because a lot of ideas out there, but we got to start trying some different things to get it down. So here's the next question. Do property taxes play into home ownership affordability? If so, how much and what can be done to improve affordability?
Yeah, of course, property taxes play into affordability. Because, for most folks, your property taxes are rolled into your monthly mortgage payment. In Anchorage in particular, so, and I'm on my other hat today, but nonetheless, we need more diversified revenue for this city. There is no way to say you're going to not be able to use property taxes or you want property tax relief if we're not going to pay for city services somehow. We have seen a substantial decrease in state assistance over the last decade. And we're asked to do more and more as a municipality, more and more at the local level that used to be picked up by the state because there are urgent issues on our streets today. Yes, property taxes are a part of affordability, but we've also done things, with every property tax relief mechanism lever we pull, somebody else has to pay the difference. And so we recently increased the residential exemption. You know who pays the difference? Renters. So now we've just made rents less affordable. So everything is a set of choices. But one way we can really start to have a conversation about more equitable choices for renters and homeowners is if we start talking about your revenue. So we aren't so reliant on property taxes.
Okay, I'm going to summarize this next question. We have a lot of issues to tackle in this state. This one has to do with the cooking light natural gas prices. So it's estimated that kind of importing LNG is our only option by 2027. That will increase homeowner energy costs by 2 to 3 times. How will we deal with this crisis?
I just did a bunch of research So I just did a bunch of research on this, working on a NOFO for some housing, where it was about resiliency for the housing. And affordable housing isn't just the cost of rents, it's the cost of energy. When we look at, and actually this came out in an AHA report, when we look at the cost of housing and the cost of living in Alaska, the biggest cost differential for Alaskans is energy. It's heating and utilities, 30% higher. And so when we talk about affordable housing, we have to come up with energy efficiencies. I heard Eric talk about, yes, it adds to the cost of the home. Is there a way, though, to think about that, though, in terms of over time, do those energy bills go down? Well, we're doing the next step. So to take it back into homelessness, we have to make sure that those utilities are within reach of that person. We wouldn't want someone to lose their housing because they can't afford the utilities. In fact, we often work with landlords who are willing to wrap the utilities into the rental amount, right? So it's one payment and it's steady. I think energy is going to be an issue that we have to address head on with housing. I know that the Anchorage Affordable Housing and Land Trust is taking on this issue on the hotel conversions and looking how to put solar on its buildings. How can we diversify the types of energy? And I know the municipality is really looking at jumping back into its climate action plan because we're a huge energy user in the municipality. And if our energy bills were to skyrocket, guess what skyrockets then? Your property taxes. So everything's connected. So that's just my 2 cents.
Any other comments, Ted?
So I moved up here. It was in 2008. Oil price and I'm booming, which was great for our budgets, but statewide, a lot of the rural communities, when we talk about affordable programs of how much people can legally pay to be compliant under the RET limits for some of the federal programs, the utility bills exceeded what some of the income limits would dictate. So it's just especially, I know it's a big problem here. I live in Anchorage. I don't want to pay more bills either, but this cost, it's a really, really big part of the housing budget in a lot of the communities, and sometimes it can exceed the base value of the rent or deal or housing cost. It's just, we've seen this play out in other communities, and it's a very painful process. Colleen can speak more willing to than I could, but I just can't understate that it's huge when we get into affordability, especially when we're talking about the restricted programs that a lot of us work in, because it limits how much people can actually charge in rent. That utility bill keeps with the exact same thing. So it makes, if we deploy it, even with public funding, to make a deal hansel, we're very able to squeeze out our bit all night.
I would just say I think it helps the conversation a lot, because previously, as of last year, the year before, everybody always thought our gas prices were going to be super cheap on the rail belt, right? And electric prices were going to be super cheap. So that really hasn't built up our contractor capacity in terms of being able to build some of these high performance homes, getting contractors to work with you on like heat pump design and driving like a high performance home. It's tough in the city, honestly. There's some random contractors like at Homer and Seward and stuff that are really good at it. But in terms of mass adoption, it just hasn't been there because the conversation hasn't been there. So I think it's gonna help, love it or hate it, whatever drives it. But yeah, we should get there.
So next question, it's kind of a cultural change question, but can you expand on the high level conversations on the interaction between the American dream, wealth building through home ownership, appreciation over inflation, and maintaining, sustaining housing stock that remains affordable? Or if no conversations yet, thoughts?
My thoughts on that is National Association of Home Builders, our motto is helping people achieve the American dream. Doing that through single family homes is pretty unattainable these days. I think like 70% of the average Americans can't afford a new construction home now. So that's just terrible, right? How do we get by that? Doing things like being able to build triplexes and fourplexes with ADUs that supplement people's income with additional rental income, I think helps achieve that. And that's kind of the direction that I see going. I have a lot of passion for building multifamily units. So hopefully that's a way for people to help achieve the American dream.
We fund a lot of rail development programs, so that's a huge part of the housing that we provide. But to say, with respect to home ownership, people buy homes, they tend to stay in the state, and that can be a good thing, and it can be a challenging trend. We all look on our little hikes. I don't know how many times you move around to find a good job opportunity. I came up to Alaska for work. I didn't have a home in Utah before I got here, so it was easy. I'd known people that have bought items and trained them not to change them. So it's a personal decision for someone, because you never know what the market's going to do for them year in, year out. But if someone wants to plant roots in Alaska, the home's probably going to be worth more than I paid for it in 10 years from now. I don't know if it's going to be that way in 2 years or 3 years, but over the long term, the things tend to appreciate. So we have this conversation with some of our younger folks who are just starting out internally building, and they're buying homes, and I think they're probably paying more than they would have 2 years ago. But 10 years from now, that home is going to be worth a lot more than what they paid for it. So it's just a consistent the data tends to tell that story.
Thank you. Next question says, does Alaska need a housing trust, and how would that differ from what we have now? So HAP was created, as I mentioned, in 2022 as a housing trust. It's a little different than what your traditional one is, that has a lot of control systems over it. So the flexibility we have as we're evolving, and we have a retreat coming up, is, we started off with kind of the top-off funding focus, but as we continue to evolve, I see us have other different types of programs, and potentially loan programs or bailiff or developer assistance and different things like that. So we're really putting our thinking hats on, especially if we get the funding through the legislature this next year, in terms of how we can continue to evolve our programs that support. One of the things we hear often is just coordination of projects across the state. Many people in rural communities wear 10 different hats, and they just don't have the bandwidth to really be able to how to figure out how to access the federal funds and various grants out there and so forth. So that's something we might talk with Nils Andreessen too. We talked from the Alaska Municipal League in terms of how we can create some structures maybe to have some support functions and make it a lot easier for people to access other funds to make programs successful together, help in manpower into the areas throughout the state. So anything else to add?
Just that, I mean, your point is, we'll take it, but some people need technical assistance, but in some communities, there's no one to try. They actually need help. We've seen a lot of people step out of their geographic and service lines to help neighbors in other parts of the state in a lot of our programs. And that seems like the Last Frontier Housing Initiative, we're actually doing this with communities because they don't have people. There's no one to train. We're literally writing a request for proposals for them and helping them do the work as a peer in addition to a funder. So I would just say the partnerships, what we envision as partnerships and what can be done in training versus direct support, that feels like it's evolving, and there's a more close relationship that's needed in some communities to make these things happen.
And this last one, just be the last question, I think we're running out of time here, is for the Alaska Housing Finance Corporation. Question, Dan. I don't know if you can answer it or not, but what would it take for Alaska Housing Finance Corporation set aside vouchers for people experiencing homelessness? How can we support that?
And so what was the question? Okay, sir.
What will it take for Alaska Housing Finance Corporation to set aside vouchers for people experiencing homelessness? How can we support that?
Well, any answer that I provide would probably be in quotes with a former director of planning and programming. Well, I
got it. Sorry, said.
But if Stacy, who's our director of governmental relations, wants to venture a guess, I'd gladly defer.
Can I underscore the importance of it? So whereas we talk about the Houston model, the one really cool thing in Houston, Houston has a similar number of people who are experiencing literal homelessness as Anchorage is, and where they've met with success, right? They get from HUD about $46 million a year. We get $4 million. Their $46 million only has to go to the support side because they have a voucher, a set aside for everyone for their rents. We don't. And so our $4 million isn't only supports, it also is covering your rents. And the stability that comes from that is that Houston's been facing a fiscal crisis in its city. They're talking about which trails they can't maintain, what things they need to close. Guess what they're not changing? Their strategy on homelessness, because it is fully systematized between their vouchers that are the set aside and their federal dollars, right? And that's where we're hoping to get in Anchorage. If we have a similarly situated problem, we know how to do it. It's the resources and the systemization that weathers local funding challenges that we really need to get past, because all the success we're finding right now in homelessness are local dollars, mostly municipal dollars and philanthropy dollars.
I knew you couldn't answer that, and that's why you touched that.
Can I just add on to that a little bit? And I would say that not only within the homelessness realm, but housing in general is not resource enough. So we talk about Indian housing, for example, for that the funding that goes, that's I believe the largest HUD program here in Alaska. That has been flat funded for over 20 years. We're looking at, I think it was nearly $4 billion total that the country has lost out on just because that money has not been increased over the years. So we are not resourced enough. And so there's homelessness, there's veterans, there are a lot of very special programs. And I know HMC does probably I know they do their best to spread their programs, but there are just so many different competing priorities, and we are just under-resourced. So I would just say that to conclude.
Just in summary, kind of one of the things it is, we know this is a big issue for Alaska, and it's going to take all of us working together in a coordinated fashion to solve it. And to help give more vouchers, that's something that we can all lobby for in terms of the federal government or work or other grants to bring in, so that our existing entities have more resources to be able to do what's needed in this state. And if we don't solve this one, we're going to be in big trouble. So I think that crisis is here, and something we need to put a lot of emphasis in, as Colleen said. So thank you.
All right. Thank you, Preston. And please join me in thanking our panel for illustrating this. Also, just briefly, we want to again thank Alaska Communications and ConocoPhillips Alaska for co-sponsoring today's program. And just to mark your calendar, we will be having the Hippo and Egan Awards in 2024. October 3rd is our planned date. We're still working out a couple of things with our IREs, but hope to be announcing that soon and look forward to having you join us in October to celebrate 2 outstanding Alaskan leaders. And with that, again, thank you for joining us. Appreciate you spending part of your Juneteenth with us.